Welcome to this final session of our series on learning how to listen, how to live compassionately. We've looked at several different practices throughout these several weeks of learning how to listen to ourselves, how to listen to others, listening to nature, and ultimately through all of those things, being open to listen to the divine, listening to God. This final practice that we're going to talk about today is pilgrimage. Many of these other practices have been very interior centered, things that you just do by yourself, wherever you're at. You just kind of find a quiet place, that sort of thing. Maybe a practice you're doing one-on-one with a person in conversation. Pilgrimage is a practice that is very much oriented with your body. It is a practice of moving out of your ordinary. Now, pilgrimage doesn't have to be these big grandiose things of, say, hiking the Camino de Santiago in northern Spain. Pilgrimage can be something quite small, just even going across the street. But the idea of pilgrimage, this metaphor that is overriding in all of these, in the practice of pilgrimage, is the metaphor of a journey. And we actually take a physical journey to enact and to embody a spiritual and inner journey that's happening inside of us. It's a journey from what we're comfortable with, maybe what we call home, and it's a journey to someplace other. Oftentimes we might go through a lot of anxiety just even going on a journey. But we do it and we work through that because of the transformation that comes as a result of the journey. That's what we're after. And so today we're talking about this practice of pilgrimage as a way to help us listen and as a way of helping us to be transformed into more compassionate people. So where am I at? Where have I come on pilgrimage, if you will? You see, when we think of pilgrimage, we might think of some of the great pilgrimages in Europe, going to cathedrals or going to places where the saints have lived, or maybe making a Hajj to Mecca. We think of these grand pilgrimages that take many weeks and a lot of resources, and yet in the United States here we actually have many different places, historic sites, natural sites that are operated either by the National Park System, maybe operated by local historical societies. And in many ways, while they don't have the same kind of feel of a religious pilgrimage, they still are a pilgrimage. And so where I'm at right now is actually a Civil War battlefield that's called Pea Ridge. It's in northwest Arkansas. There's many of these Civil War battlefields scattered throughout the United States that are operated by the National Park System and historical societies. And these battlefields have this idea of a pilgrimage embedded in them. Many of the battlefields actually, those that would have actually fought in the battle years after would come on a regular basis back to the battlefield to remember that battle. And then on both sides, the Union and Confederate, to kind of have this space of reconciliation. And in fact, that's what had happened at this battlefield. And that was something that was naturally occurring. And then eventually it was petitioned and it was put under the realm of the National Park System for continued preservation and interpretation. And so this space was a pilgrimage site for reconciliation. It's a great way of seeing this act of moving physically to a place to where you start listening to other voices and come to a place of healing. But there's a question that I think still comes to my mind, and even continuing to come to these places of pilgrimage, we keep asking these questions and we keep interrogating the memory of where we are. And the memory that is coming to me as I'm here is, yes, there was the reconciliation between the fighters on the Union side and the Confederate side, but where's the reconciliation of the black people? Where'd that happen? Was that made available in this place? See, the Civil War, even though some people like to take that memory and kind of romanticize it a little bit and say it was really about states' rights. No, when you get down to it, it was about slavery. It was about the state's rights and a person's rights to own another human being as a slave, as property. That fight happened in the Civil War. It happened physically in this location where I'm standing, and yet the white people who fought over this right to own another person, where's the person who was owned? Where are they at in our memory? See, I'll show you some pictures here of these two monuments that are placed here. One is to Confederate generals that died on the battlefield here. And the other here is to the Union generals. Both generals are being honored. And then when you look at these words that are inscribed on this Union monument, it is saying that both sides were on the side of God. How is this possible? How is God on the side of owning people as slaves and fighting for that? How is God on the side of bloodshed and killing your neighbor? But this is how we remember some of our past. And we do it in such a way so that we just make ourselves feel better. But yet when we do that, we keep ourselves from being transformed. You see, we look around, and in fact, where I'm at right now, this was a town called Leetown. After the battle that happened here, this place was full of wounded soldiers from both the Union and the Confederate Army. And yet, as we look around, there's absolutely nothing left of this town. And it makes us think that the Civil War happened so long ago, that we're past this issue of racism. And yet, perhaps when the reconciliations happened between the Union and the Confederate, but yet when the very people who were being owned as slaves were ignored and forgotten in that reconciliation, we never had the opportunity to face that uncomfortableness of our nation's racism. We never faced it, we never journeyed through it. And so, hundreds of years later, we're still dealing with that same sin of racism. It's still there because we never dealt with it. You see, pilgrimage gives us this opportunity to face these things that are uncomfortable. We physically go to these places and we can no longer ignore it. Maybe we try to in our memories, but when we go there physically, it forces our body to get out of our head and to realize and to open up, to listen to what is actually going on. And it's a lot more complicated and difficult than what we try to make it. But it's in that complication, it's in that difficulty that's where we might come to opportunities of transformation. Here in this space that is preserving this Civil War battlefield, there's another piece of history that is actually preserved that runs through here, and this was the Trail of Tears. The Trail of Tears, where Native and indigenous peoples in the South were physically and forcibly removed from their homeland, forced to travel miles and miles and miles and miles, in which thousands and thousands of people died along it, to go to a place that was not their home in areas such as Oklahoma. Now, in this whole site, this is where I'm going to be a little critical of the national park system. I love the national parks. But yet in our interpretation and in our remembrance, again, we kind of gloss over some of these painful moments in our history. And when we do that, we're never brought to the moment where we might come to a place of transformation. See, the Trail of Tears comes through here. The only marker in this entire park is just one sign. It just marks it right here, that the Trail of Tears passes. They have one interpretive sign that kind of tells the story of the Trail of Tears, talks about how thousands of persons died along it. But then it ends with this curious statement of, but when they came to Oklahoma, they established themselves as successful and sovereign nations. You first have to question that statement. Are they really sovereign? Has the U.S. government actually honored our treaties with these so-called sovereign nations? Have we treated them as sovereign nations? That is probably not true. Are they really successful there in comparison to where they were in their own homeland, living off of their own land where their ancestors were? We forcibly, as a country, forcibly removed them, and then now, centuries later, we look back on it and try to romanticize it and say they were heroes because they stood through that trial that happened to them. And now look at them, they're all successful as sovereign nations. And we think that that issue is over, and it makes us, it doesn't bring us to the point of questioning what is the federal government's relationship with these native tribes. Are they just relationships? Have we upheld the treaties? And I think if we answer those questions, we're going to come to the point of saying, no, that hasn't happened. And in the very place where we might remember these things, where we might come to these places of transformation on a pilgrimage, our memories get in the way. We romanticize it and just move on so that we can feel good about ourselves, so that we can feel good about the state of our country. This is a challenge in a pilgrimage. You see, anybody can just travel around and be a tourist. We can step out of our car, take a quick picture. We take the words that are there on the side of the road and think everything is great. We post it on Facebook and Instagram. Everybody applauds us for being so adventurous. And yet, are we actually listening? And that's where pilgrimage takes travel and tourism and turns it into a transformative practice. It's a practice of listening. It's a practice of incorporating all these different memories. It's a practice of incorporating the place in which you are standing, to listen to others, to listen how God might be inviting you to a place of transformation. So here's what I'm inviting you into in this final session together. I'm inviting you on a pilgrimage. Now, certainly you can do something like I've done and come to a National Park Service location, state historical location. But there's a lot of other pilgrimages that can have transformative effects. Maybe it's digging into some of your family history and taking a pilgrimage to where you had grown up or where your grandparents had grown up, taking a pilgrimage to cemetery sites to see where your ancestors lie. Perhaps it's a pilgrimage to the other side of town, to go to a park that you normally don't go to go to the supermarket that you normally don't go to. See, the pilgrimage practice itself is getting up from your place of comfort and going someplace else for the purpose of transformation. Not for the purpose of taking a selfie and posting it on Instagram and Facebook, but for the purpose of listening to the complexity of stories of the people around you, the people that had gone on before and their memories that are held within that place. Pilgrimage is a practice of getting outside of yourself to listen so that you come to these places where you might be transformed. Thank you for journeying with me these last several weeks in learning how to listen. And ultimately, as we listen, that will help us to live in compassionate ways. And if you hold to particular religious beliefs, to particular teachings, even to particular practices, and if that does not lead you to compassionate living, then something's off with that. And it's been my contention these whole several weeks that if you're not listening, if your practices and teachings cut you off from being able to listen to others, to listen to yourself, to listen to the natural world around you, then perhaps those things need to change. Because as we listen, then we might be invited into compassionate living. Grace and peace.